Hmm? You can't have food. Well, you're in class now. I know. Sorry. Yeah. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. So have your notes out. We're going to be getting right back into the Kosovo situation. It's going to be all things Kosovo. And we may come close to, if not actually wrap up that part of the notes, which will then, therefore, be the last notes you're going to be doing in here. Next time, whatever we have to do, so on Friday, you're going to come in here. We'll wrap up any notes that we still have remaining. We'll do review. I'm going to do paper 1 training as well. So I'm going to give you the first of 4 different large packets that you're going to be using to prepare for, because next month, Ashton, you got IB exam in history on, when is that, like the 4th and the 5th, I think. Got paper 1, paper 2, and then you got paper 3, and then you'll be all done with the history. So a lot of things going on in here. Go ahead and mark it down, 80 points, all matching a test on Rwanda, the Balkans, and Kosovo. Didn't put any true-false this time, so for those of you guys who like true-false, sorry. For those of you guys who like matching, know the difference. And I think I put them in groups of 4, which makes it a little bit, better odds as far as narrowing it down. So that's going to be coming up on Wednesday of next week. And I don't know, it's kind of a tough thing when I schedule a test and so forth. The next thing I want to do right after that is paper 1, but I'm going to schedule that in class, paper 1 experience for you, training, not the training, but actually doing a paper 1. And you'll see that that's very, very doable. If you know how, you know OPVL, you know some of the basics and so forth, it's not too crazy hard to do well on paper 1. That hasn't changed. It's still an hour-long experience. Got it? Got it? And, yeah. And then the following 2 weeks, since I get to see you guys just twice during those 2 weeks, we will have in-class essays each of those days. So it ultimately will yield 4. I think we'll do, the first week we'll do paper, paper 2, and then the following week we'll do 2 paper 3 exams. Okay, and then the following week after that, you guys are doing your IB exams. Okay, so that's all coming up. Jack, see me after class. It'll give you your test, so you can get that. Just a reminder, by the end of the week, get the retakes in and so forth, get the points for that. There will be points, obviously, for the test, and there's going to be points for the in-class experience with paper 1 and the 2 paper 2s and the 2 paper 3s. So come in prepared. Your job is going to be coming in prepared, having, we'll do like 40, 45 minutes of the essays in class. That'll be the following week and the following week, and then there will be peer review. You guys are going to be the first people to look at each other's essays for peer review. The main goal of that, of course, is going to be calibrating you so that by the time you come in for the actual IB history exam, you know, boom, I'm going to write a 45 to 50-minute essay and get the timing just right, get, plenty of information and so forth in there, but you're going to be going over your notes and studying that material. Today is going to be the last big chunk of new material. Maybe we'll do a little bit more if we have to in order to wrap up on Friday. Okay, so that's a big deal. By the way, I got good news. If you care, next year's IB exams are going to be similarly set up to this year's IB exams because the juniors are ill-affected, as you have been. It was really good news. The juniors were really happy to hear about that. So they're also, for their paper 2 next year, they'll just have 1 essay. And for their paper 3, they'll just have 2 essays. Same as like for you guys. So I was really glad to hear that. The other IB teachers were really glad to hear that too. Took some digging to find that out. But yeah, it was in the IB materials, and yeah. There's still places in the United States that aren't going to be sitting down for an exam. They're still doing totally online. And here we've just got one person doing totally online. You're welcome to review, and obviously if you're not here, hopefully those students are doing that because there's a lot of content still going on here. Questions? Let's stand for the pledge. Okay. Ready, Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay? All right. So where we left off, we were looking at Kosovo. We're just getting started officially on the Kosovo part. But Trenton, did Kosovo participate in that whole fight with Bosnia and Croatia in the middle of the 90s? Is that a consensus? How many of you guys would say yes, they were very involved? What do you say?
No, they weren't, because they wanted to see what side was winning.
Well, yeah, they...
But not like exactly.
And it's kind of like, here's the deal, and this is a good transition. The leading figure in Kosovo is this guy right here, sometimes referred to as the Gandhi of Kosovo. And his tactics were, non-cooperation, peaceful types of things. So he's like, okay, I'm going to try and stay out of that mess because a lot of people got killed in the mess that was the war in Bosnia. Ashton, are you paying attention? Okay, yeah, focus on this part. Mary's attentions are delightful as well, but you need to focus on the educational component here. So turn around physically. Yeah, commit yourself. Wonderful. Good. All right. So, so he's the pacifist leader and so forth. And but importantly, there will be people with different points of view in the Kosovo situation. And they're going to play a very important role in the events that play out in the remaining time here. Okay? They are known as the KLA. You can see by the letters and so forth, it's the UCK, and that stands for the Kosovo Liberation Army. They will be formed up in 1996, and just to give you an image, I didn't show this image before, there's the KLA. You can tell where they're coming from. Ashton, where are these guys coming from as far as more autonomy, perhaps even independence for Kosovo? Perfect. Can you think of any countries that actually gained their independence as a result of using militant methods? Yeah, think of April 19th, 1775. Lexington Concord. The British are like, let's see if we can nip these guys in the bud by going out and grabbing all their guns. That didn't work out. So, in any event, and ultimately in America, you saw the coalition of people who were moving for pacifist, goals as well as militant goals, and we became the United States of America. I mean, it wasn't nice and clean and simple, but nevertheless, these guys, write it down, the KLA are going to take a lot of the initiative, kind of like the Sons of Liberty did in Boston. They are going to try and, in a sense, prompt a fight from the Serbs. And here's something they know. If the Serbs hit back too hard in Kosovo, will the West respond?
Yes.
Frank, did the West, the United States and NATO, did they respond to stop the Serbs when the Serbs were hitting the Croatians and the Bosniaks? Yes, yeah. And what kinds of military weaponry or resources did we use? I'll give you a few. Air attack, ground attack, sea attack. Did we put boots on the ground? Did we send in soldiers to engage in fighting with Serb forces? No. What did we use? McKinley's having her little animated thing here. Pew, pew, pew. Yes, we were sending in sophisticated air attack. We had planes going over, and of course we also had cruise missiles. And you can tell, because you've seen the footage from the early 90s with the war in the Persian Gulf. The United States weaponry, is it pretty sophisticated? Is it pretty accurate? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you put it on a target, it will hit that target for the most part. You just have to make sure you have the right targets, because otherwise it's going to cause some problems. And I'll get to that, because that's going to be a problem here as well. Yeah, I believe it, yeah. Not too many, but it did happen, yeah. So, 1996, let's get to the details here, because I've got several pages. I'm going to go through all these, bing, 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 bing. 1996, 3 Serbs were killed in Pristina in a cafe by the KLA. They're KIA in by the KLA. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay, Melody, where's Pristina? Got to know where certain cities are. What part of Yugoslavia is Pristina in? It's in Kosovo. Yeah, it's the biggest city in Kosovo. Very good. And these attacks against the Serbs will escalate. In other words, the KLA is like, Serbs, we want you to get out of here. And what are we talking about as far as the percentage of Serbs actually living in Kosovo? I think I gave you the number of about like 17%. So it's a fairly small minority. And yet, Mary, why is Kosovo so important to the Serbs overall? Historically. I'll give you a clue. June 28th. The Battle of the Field of Blackbirds, which is also referred to as the Kosovo. And that's where they were defeated by the Turks so many years ago. It's a place of great importance to them. It's like, I don't know, if you're a Texan, what is a place of great importance for you, even though you lost there a long, long time ago? You guys are obviously not spending much time in Texas. You don't remember the Alamo. Anyway, yeah, okay, well, I think if you were growing up in Texas, you would have some instruction on the Battle of the Alamo, which was a defeat for the Texans, just as the Serbs lost in the Battle of the Field of Blackbirds. Okay, so anyway, it's almost like, does the KLA want the Serbs to retaliate? Perhaps the answer is yes. Okay, now Rogova would be going, this is going to end up with a lot of people dead, a lot of innocent people dead. And these guys are going, yeah, well, you know what it also might end up with? We also might end up as an independent country. And we can shake off Milosevic and the Serbs and all the rest of the parts of Yugoslavia that we really don't want to have to deal with. And is there precedent already for people within Yugoslavia shaking off the rest of their fellow compatriots and setting up independent countries? Yes, I mean, how many different independent countries have come out of Yugoslavia? Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and actually two, if you look at that, because there's two component parts of Bosnia, Montenegro, okay? And today, Northern Macedonia, okay? Anyway, and so we've got Kosovo now wanting to establish itself. Oh, look, there's a flag. Notice it's on paper. That gives you a little bit of a sense of kind of what's going to come out. Because when I purchased these flags, these are UN-recognized countries. Kosovo is not going to be a UN-recognized country. So it's not in the flag pack. It's not in the flag pack. Here's an easy one. Jack, tell me, why didn't the United Nations have Kosovo as an independent country? We haven't gotten there yet, but the United States, I'll tell you, recognizes Kosovo as an independent country. I'll give you a clue. It has to do with 5 on the Security Council, each of which have veto power, including the United States, France, Britain. You think Russia's going to veto Kosovo being an independent country? You're darn right. Russia's going to veto Kosovo being an independent country. Okay? Because Russia's going to remain very loyal and stalwart and close to their longtime friends in Serbia. But notice this. Make a little note of this. How's Russia doing in the 1990s as all this is kind of playing out? Not so good. Okay? They're just coming off of the Cold War. They're transitioning into democracy and capitalism, and yeah, it's not going to be necessarily like, they're oh, by the way, I think Putin just signed a law that changed the restrictions on who gets to be president. There is no restriction on the term for who gets to be president. Presumably, if Putin wanted to and was elected, he can continue serving as president of Russia for quite some time. Oh, are you surprised? No, I'm not surprised. Okay? All right. Things that impact what's going on in Kosovo. Just like we saw some things like in Burundi having some impact tangentially on what's going on in Kosovo, what happens, write this down, in 1997 in Albania is going to impact what's going to play in Kosovo. Write this down. 1997, in the summer of 1997, the Albanian government collapsed. All right? The communist dictatorship that they had in Albania A collapse. And so what does that mean? Well, I'm not going to get into all the details there, but needless to say, when you have a collapse of government, stuff goes missing. Control over very important things that the government has goes missing. It ends up in the hands of other people. Like, I don't know, Quinn, what might be something that these guys might like to get their hands on that presumably belong to the Albanian government? McKinley, yes. Shh. Yes, Quinn, that is correct. Weapons. And so a whole bunch of weapons start making their way into the hands of the KLA. The United States State Department, looking at the situation there, makes some interesting observations. Write this down. In early 1998, the United States State Department identified the KLA as a terrorist group. Okay? I mean, they look at various different pieces of evidence, and these guys are responsible for, I don't know, killing people, Serbs and so forth, in Kosovo. That's in early 1998. By the latter part of 1998, the United States government, and by the way, who was the president of the United States from January 1993 all the way to January of 2000? Bill Clinton, okay? President Clinton. You've got some background on President Clinton, what's going on. Rwanda, has it already happened, or will it happen in the future? It's already happened, okay? So that was 1994. So that thing is sort of like fresh in the mind. So here we go. By late 1998, the United States government backpedals and wants talks regarding Kosovo to include the KLA. In a sense, it's kind of like they're there, they've got weapons, they've got some support. You got to include them in the talks, okay? So that's going on. Even though the United States government is still saying, they're not a terrorist group, but sometimes they commit acts of terror. Oh my gosh. It's kind of like Rwanda wasn't genocide, but there were acts of genocide taken. Seriously? Do we have to look at exactly what? I guess so. So, meanwhile, the Serb government is not happy with what is going on in Kosovo. All right? So they're going to, here we go, 1998, the Serb government is going to attempt to regain control of what is going on in Kosovo. And some of the methods they're going to be, are they going to send in kumbaya teams to sort of have everyone sort of huddle and have hand holding together and look at each other and try and come up with commonalities? No, it's going to be brutal, right? And I think the KLA kind of knew this. Yeah, it's going to be brutal. This is 1998. The Serbs are sending in troops. They're brutal. They're basically, many of the people in Kosovo who are well, I don't know, who are we going to support as the Serbs are sending in troops to crack down on these guys? Is there going to be more support for Rugova, who has the pacifist approach, or is there going to be more support for the KLA that has a militant approach? What do you think? What do you think, Garrett? There's going to be more support. Write that down. There's going to be more support for the military approach. It's kind of like what happened in what became the United States. I mean, the most radical action first occurred in Boston, but eventually, how many of the 13 colonies, self-declared states, ended up joining in a military fight? All of them, yeah, they all did. So, critical thing. They take the initiative, they get what they want. They get more and more support. And they've got some weapons that they got in their hand as a result of the Albanian government kind of messing up. And so Rugova is going to be sort of pushed to the background, not completely, dishonored or so forth. He'll still maintain a lot of support, but it's kind of like some people are saying, step aside, Rugova. I know you're being a nice guy and a good governor and leader for the Kosovo people, but first things first. We got to get independence, and the Serbs are not going to give us independence, certainly not without a fight. Okay? Clinton, meanwhile, has to figure out what to do. This is 1998. And what is going on in 1998? Because he's getting pressure to do this or do that or so forth. And it's oh my gosh. It was kind of crazy because in 1998, we have President Clinton, and he's in the midst of the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal, okay, which broke in 1997. By the time you get to 1998, you have a full-fledged impeachment process thing going on. And it is, needless to say, for Clinton, it is quite it's not real good for his polling and everything. It was yeah, it's yeah, I mean, Yeah, trying to see. Let me see. The impeachment trial and so forth, that went on into 1999. And then, of course, by the time we got to 2000, that's all over. But his vice president, Gore, is running for president and misses it just by that much. Okay? And then you get 8 years of George W. Bush. It was interesting because that time, I'm going to show you this clip because we've got a little bit of time for this. It's always interesting to see how, like, the news media and Hollywood and entertainment deals with this. Because sometimes they reflect and so forth, kind of what's going on. A movie came out at that time in 1998 as far as like a distraction. Do you need a distraction? It was like, it's a Hollywood theme, but it's kind of like, is there a distraction? What can you do to distract the country away from a presidential scandal? Have a war. Turn the attention away to something else. If something's going bad on you and you're like, why is something going so bad on you? And you're like, let's talk about this. Right? Have you ever done that with parents that have like asked you like about something that you really didn't want to talk to? And you change the subject? Or maybe perhaps more commonly, you asked them about something and they changed the subject. Well, here we go. This was a movie that was created starring Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro is an advisor to a fictional president who has a sex scandal weeks before an election. Dustin Hoffman plays a Hollywood producer. The presidential aide goes to the Hollywood producer and says, can we get a pageant of something that looks like a parade, that's got like a victims, so we can feel good for the victims, and maybe we can help the victims. And then maybe, a song that a whole bunch of like singers can come together and sing songs. They were doing that a lot in those days, for all kinds of various different relief things. And then maybe like a hero. The guy they tap for the hero is played by Woody Harrelson. Turns out not to be like totally 100% hero quality because they pull him out of a prison after he'd committed all kinds of various different crimes. Anyway, it's quite comic. And of course, it's all secret because if you're a Hollywood producer, you cannot get credit for it. That's what they want. If you're making a movie or writing a script or you're an actor, you want applause, you want awards. But in the context of this story, it's supposed to be top secret, as in, don't try and take credit, or we'll just have to like, pew, pew, bump you off. The idea, wag the dog, is the dog's tail is wagging, but if you can get the tail to wag the dog, then that's kind of like changing the whole subject and changing everything around, and it's very weird, but perhaps it works. Yes?
I'm sorry, you said they went to a movie director and asked him to throw a parade?
A pageant to create the image. The idea is that there's a lot of people in America that don't pay close attention to what's actually going on in the real world, so they can be fooled fairly easily by folks that take the directive and initiative and create a fake war with Albania. So they're looking at the situation here. Do you trust all the news content that you receive from the sources that you receive them from?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, don't trust them if these guys are the ones behind it producing it. Anyway, I'll show you the trailer. It's a little one-off, and then we'll get back to the serious notes, but it's kind of like what motivates. It's kind of like if we're having a really bad situation in this country economically, some people are like, well, let's invade Canada. That should be like a nice distraction and so forth. Be careful if China runs into great economic difficulties. I mean, like, who could they invade? Daniel, who could they invade? You guys are really good ventriloquists. That sounded more like melody, but what do you think, Daniel? Do you think Taiwan is potentially vulnerable? Sure. We'll play this clip.
There's a crisis in the White House. What's a crisis? And the president's top advisors have been called together.
Sexual misconduct occurred inside the Oval Office. With the election only days away, how much will the scandal affect the outcome?
The president spent the weekend pressing the flash oil campaign against dating.
Now, Washington's top spin doctor. Could you distract the press for 11 days to the election and pick the guy she is?
Distract the press for 11 days.
But he can't pull it off without Hollywood's top producer.
Do I know you? We have some mutual friends in Washington. Why come from it? We want you to produce.
You want me to produce your war? Not a war, it's a pageant.
We need a theme, a song, some visuals. We need to do
Good thing this is the 90s. It doesn't happen anymore. It's like a parade.
President's gonna go to war with Albania in about 30 minutes.
Albania's harbor crime.
These are chips.
And in armed position on Serbs, will punch him away, right? And all the effects of real war. Okay, put the village. Give me some sound of screaming. Without the casualties. America has seldom witnessed a more poignant picture.
She's got a cat. Gosh.
I can't believe it. Without you. In fact, you sent him the Christmas card, and without Dr. Williams. Okay, there you go.
Okay, here's the hero. Woody Harrelson from District 12. I won't give it away as to what happens to him, but it's interesting. No.
What can I do to me?
Academy Award winner Dustin Hoffman. Politics. That's Academy Award winner Robert De Niro. How would you like that mastership? That's my favorite. Well, I just the first story to tell. You can tell me about it. I'm just kidding. It's a pageant.
Don't tell anyone. See, it's a pageant. I told you.
If it hits the shan, somebody's gonna have to stay after school.
Yeah, sometimes the line between what is going on in the real world and what is going on in the news media and Hollywood and so forth is all very, very interesting and blurred. All right. Continuing on. Here we go. What really starts grabbing the media attention? Yes?
I was gonna say, there's another movie called Canadian Bacon, where the president is in war in Canada.
Isn't John Candy in that one?
I don't know.
No. Okay. When did that come out?
1995.
1995. There you go. Yeah, distractions. What's going to get the attention? What is going to get the attention of the American people so the American people will, and the president, therefore, will go, okay, let's go and have to do something about this. Dead bodies. The news media, write this down. There's going to be two situations in particular where the folks are going to be like, the Serbs are overreacting and they're killing villagers and so forth. You're not going to have, notice this, you are not going to have nearly as many dead bodies as we had in Rwanda. That's good news. But you have dead bodies of villagers and so forth. Here we go. 35 dead villagers in Gornja Brijni. I'm sure I'm butchering that. You got a chance? Okay. September 26, 1998. Western opinion, United States, West Europe, and so forth, is turning against the Serbs. And they're fresh off having beaten the Serbs in the war in Bosnia. So now you've got kind of like War in the Balkans, Part 2, or Atrocities in the Balkans, Part 2. What is the West going to do about it? Well, we've got one incident here. You're going to have then the United Nations taking it up, sort of, a series of resolutions from the United Nations calling for dialogue, an international peace monitor sent into Kosovo, but really not much change. When you just call for dialogue and so forth, you know, it's kind of like, is that going to be enough coming out of the United Nations? Now, keeping in mind, is the United Nations, what do you think, Quinn? Is the United Nations going to call for military troops to be sent in to intervene? What do you mean, hopefully not? Probably not. Probably not. Why? What do you mean you don't know why? Jack, can you consult with Quinn to tell him why the United Nations, and specifically the United Nations Security Council, is not going to approve a United Nations-supported military force to resolve the situation in Kosovo? Because of the veto power of Russia. Russia is a permanent member of, yeah, and they figured it out. I mean, after they walked out of the Korean War, they're like, wait a minute, we had veto power, we should have vetoed UN involvement in the Korean War. So, Jack, who do you suppose actually could take the initiative, if not the United Nations, for military involvement in Kosovo? And ultimately they will, and they did in Bosnia. It's got another acronym, it's got 4 letters. The first one is N, and the rest of it sounds like my toe. NATO, yeah, I mean NATO, yeah. So eventually NATO will be involved once again with the United States and Britain and so forth, and those guys are going to get involved. All right, but we got one more. The turning point here is going to be in early January, early 1999, and you're going to have another massacre. This is one in Rashak. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. In fact, my C should have a little thing above it. 45 people were killed. This is a really kind of a horrific image here. You've got the United States diplomat in the area, William Walker, who was walking along with others past a series of dead bodies from that community with Kosovo Muslims who had been killed. Now here's the deal, okay? 45, yeah. Here's the deal, and he's very angry, and he calls it a massacre, and he reports back to President Clinton, we need to do something about this, okay? He calls for the, we've seen this before, the International Criminal Tribunal of Yugoslavia. Remember the ICTY? Those were the guys that handled war crimes prosecutions after the Bosnian War. And remember we talked about that? There were, how many did we have? We had 45 Serbs that were convicted, 12 Croats, and 4 Bosniaks. So he's saying, look, we got these guys, the ICTY, and they should be involved now here in investigating and prosecuting war crimes against innocent villagers in Kosovo. All right? So that's what's going on. Response from Serbia, 2 days later, Serbia says, no, we're not going to let those guys come in here. And they actually shelled the area, and they removed the corpses. So it made it really hard to conduct an investigation as to, like, how these people died, because, he's walking past them, they don't need any assistance and so forth there. It looks pretty callous, but that's because he's continuing to look at further bodies. But within a couple of days and so forth, all the bodies are gone, and so you can't conduct any real investigation. Response from the West. Western leaders, the President of the United States and others, don't like it at all. And they do something which is quite interesting. They demand that Serbia and the Kosovar Albanians, right, come together to discuss the situation. Now, it's to a nice place, the Chateau de Rambouillet, I guess, I don't know how to pronounce it. It looks like ratatouille, but anyway. It's French, okay? It's near Paris, France. It's a nice location, okay, so we got a place for you to be there. The British, write this down. The British are going to be there. The French, the United States, Germany, Italy, and Russia is invited as well. I think it makes sense to involve, you're going to see actually Russia is going to be involved in a lot of these different activities going forward here. Even though, Russia's kind of like hesitant to not have military force sent in to resolve it, at least as far as the UN, Russia, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Okay? So, it's kind of like, we want you guys, come here right now to this room. Like if you get into a little bit of a spat with your sibling, and your parents are like, come here right now, we're going to have a talk. Okay? Well, who's going to show up? The Kosovar Albanians send a delegation. Who do you suppose is going to be part of that delegation? Livy, who do you suppose is going to be one of the persons in that delegation? I'll give you a clue. He's like a pacifist leader. That guy, okay? And who else has been gaining credibility among the Kosovars? Tara, who else what other group has been gaining credibility among the Kosovars that you can't leave them out of talks? Good, who's the leader of the KLA? Wow. You want to know the guy's name? Well, I'll show you a picture. Here he is. Hashim, I want to say Thachi, I'm probably mispronouncing that as well. Here we go, right here. That's the guy, write it down. He is the founder and leader of the KLA, okay? So he is going to participate. He's 30 years old, I believe at the time, so he was a fairly young man, okay? And so he is at that place. Are the Serbs going to be excited about participating? No. Write it down. They refuse. Okay, they're not really interested in going along with it. And within 3 weeks after, here we go, it's called the Rambouillet, whatever, Accords, which is basically written primarily by the Western countries, a draft of the Rambouillet Accords, and it's kind of like, okay, here, guys, sign this. We want both sides to sign. We put a lot of pressure on the Kosovars and the Serbians to sign. The Serbians and the Kosovars initially refused to sign. The Serbians say, this is a domestic issue. We shouldn't have outside parties telling us what to do because Kosovo is part of Serbia. It's semi-autonomous, but it's part of Serbia. Kosovo ultimately says, okay, March 15th, 1999, we'll sign it under pressure. Although their position is, we want eventually a referendum on independence. Now, Rodrigo, why do you suppose the Kosovars are insistent on a referendum on independence? Like a vote among all the people living in Kosovo. Yeah, do you think they'll win it? Why? What is the percentage of population in Kosovo of Muslim Kosovars? 70. 17 is the Serbian component. So the vast number of people living in Kosovo are Kosovar, Muslim, Albanian, whatever you want to call. Okay? So that's going to be their position. All right? Here are the terms of the agreement. March 15th. Yeah. So we got the Western powers are signing it. Russia's kind of going along, and Russia's an interesting thing because they're trying to improve relations with the West. They're trying to keep their continual friendship and so forth with the Serbs. They don't really like being pushed around, but they're in a difficult economic position. It's not a great thing and that's those first 10 years coming out of the defeat in the Cold War. I mean, ultimately, the Russians are going to look and they'll have somebody who will be perceived as a much stronger leader, but that's not going to happen until Putin comes in the 2000s. So, the Serbs don't go along with that. Okay? Here are the terms. You ready? Here are the terms of the Rambouillet agreement that only one side has signed. NATO has access to Kosovo. Write it down. And the rest of Serbia. Whoa. You can see why the Serbs are not keen about going along with that. To ensure implementation, the NATO has access to what is going on in Kosovo and the rest of Serbia. Like, well, was there anything in there? Throw a bone to the Serbs. Is there anything that they might want? Take a guess. What do you think, Jackson? What do you suppose the Serbs would want as part of this agreement, even though they didn't sign it, with respect to the KLA? Them to disarm. Write that down. That's going to be part of the accord. The KLA is supposed to disarm. Remember in the Rwanda agreements? Remember the Tutsi rebels? They were supposed to disarm or whatever. And then what happened to that Tutsi rebel organization ultimately? They all joined. Yeah, not only did they win, but then they became the bulk of the new Rwandan military. Okay? Don't be surprised if that ultimately happens in Kosovo. So these guys are signing on. I mean, the KLA agreed to disarm as part of this agreement. And they're probably thinking, we'll disarm for now. And then we'll take on positions in the official independent Kosovo military. I mean, that's not beyond imagination. Here's the next component of the agreement, the Rambouillet agreement. After 3 years, there will be an international conference that will settle the future of Kosovo. Okay, so we're like a 3-year cooling off period, and then they'll sit here and figure out what to do with Kosovo. Critics, particularly critics in Serbia, say this is a declaration of war disguised as a peace document. In other words, basically it's saying, Serbia, your idea of keeping Kosovo as part of your country and so forth, it's probably not going to fly ultimately. Because if we sit down and have an agreement and really allow the people self-determination as to what country they're going to be part of, how's the vote going to turn out in Kosovo? I mean, Rodrigo already identified it. If you got over 70% of the population, it's kind of like if you left it up to the South Africans as to who would actually have the right to vote, would black Africans, South Africans, have the right to vote? Of course they would. Yeah. I mean, that's ultimately what's going to happen. So, the Serbs still, write this down, they refuse. They refuse, they refuse, they refuse. So NATO's like, oh, you're not going to sign it. I guess we're going to have to move in then. March 24th, 1999. NATO is going to move in against the Serb positions in Kosovo.
I thought that they wanted permission
Yeah.
they weren't giving permission, so they did it anyway.
So if those countries, NATO countries like Germany and Britain and France and the United States and so forth, if they want permission to go in, and they don't get permission to go in from the Serbs, they go in anyway. It's called Operation Allied Force. Wow. Do you remember when the United Nations and so forth said, hey, Saddam Hussein, you need to get out of Kuwait by such and such date. If you don't, we're going in. And that's what happens. Write it down. 77 days of bombing. Okay, so what Frank was talking about with the Bosnian situation, it's going to be the same situation here. NATO bombing. Got that? Shh. NATO bombing. And it will continue, from March all the way until June 10th. That's when you guys, that's when this school finishes. So it's kind of like, imagine if you're in Kosovo and you're Serb troops, you're going to be intensively bombed for 77 days. Notice this, and you anticipated this already. Did NATO seek official approval of the United Nations Security Council? No, because they knew they weren't going to get it. Okay? So NATO did this on their own. NATO it's kind of interesting because it's like NATO was formed during the Cold War. Well, this is after the Cold War. So what is the purpose of NATO? Well, guys, please. One of the first things that happens with NATO in the 1990s is it's going to be used to solve situations in Europe, in particular, the situation in Kosovo. Write this down. 38,000 air missions. Oh my gosh, is right. They're going to be taking off from, NATO air bases in Italy and Germany, Germany at that time. They'll be taking off from U.S. aircraft carriers and so forth. 38,000. Only 2 aircraft will fail to return. You got that? 2 aircraft. No boots on the ground. This is an interesting point that what we saw in the war in Bosnia. Shh, guys, please. We saw in the war in Bosnia. Was NATO able to get their way against Serb forces by strictly an air campaign? Yes. And that's what's going to happen here as well. Okay? What are going to be their targets? And this was an interesting thing. President Clinton, make a little note of this. This is an interesting sort of like a congressional thing. In our country's history, have we fought wars without actually getting a declaration of war? Yeah. The last declaration of war I think we had was World War II. But always, put this down, always presidents have gone, Vietnam War and the wars in the Persian Gulf and Iraq and so forth, always presidents have gone to Congress for joint resolutions supporting the use of military force. In fact, I think we still have pending joint resolution for use of military force in Afghanistan. I think there's still one maybe going on with respect to Iraq. Clinton did not ask for that from Congress. Write this down. Clinton did not ask for that. He basically said, I might do that, or I would do that if I were going to be calling for, as Commander-in-Chief, boots on the ground, sending in ground troops. But he figured correctly that he was going to be able to accomplish his purpose with air attacks. Shh. Okay? So that's an interesting constitutional question. So people ask, President Trump, Did he hit Iranian forces during his presidency? Yeah, sent in a missile to take out one of the Iranian generals who was visiting Baghdad, that he said that the Iranian general was associated with attacks on the United States forces in the area, therefore was a terrorist, and therefore his days were up. Did he go to Congress and seek that approval ahead of time? No. Okay? So it's very interesting as far as, keep an eye on this, because this is a continual issue. Who has control of the United States military? You got the president as commander-in-chief. You got Congress playing a very important role. In this situation, the president, Clinton, sent in the United States military with air attacks. But no boots on the ground. In Congress, some of there was complaints and so forth, but did they ultimately pass a law saying that the president can't use military force and so forth in this situation? No. After 77 days, it was over. It's kind of like, you know, sometimes people are like, well, don't ask permission first because you're not going to get the permission. Just do it, and then, you know, ask permission afterwards, maybe later if it all works out, kind of. Do you do that? It's a risky proposition. Have you ever done something that presumably maybe you should have asked your parents' permission beforehand? You just did it you did it already, and then hoped it would all work out? How many of you guys have had a situation where it ultimately all worked out? Okay. Do you use that very often? Sometimes, yeah. You have to be very particular in that as you go forward in life. Anyway, so that's an important distinction going on there. Very, very specific targets that Clinton is using. And the United States military is going to take the bulk of it, but we are going to have French and British and Italian and German military involvement as well. But the United States, put this down, the United States, and this was one of the big complaints that Trump had. As far as NATO is concerned, put this down. The United States pays the most money to get the forces up to speed. And that was Trump's complaint all along during his presidency. He's like, come on, NATO allies, you need to spend more. Because which force is going to do most of those 38,000 air missions? The United States, yeah. Because we have that capability. We have the capability of being involved in all kinds of various different parts of the world. So, in any event. Now, as far as the specific targets, make sure you write this down. This is very important. We are hitting, we as in NATO, particularly the United States, are hitting very precise targets using precision guiding to hit military targets. We're using cruise missiles and so forth. We're not just like, this is not World War II where you fly over the big bombers and just drop a bunch of bombs on cities. We're way past that. We are hitting precise targets. We are hitting them in Kosovo, airfields, army garrisons. We are also hitting targets in Serbia, even back to Belgrade. Write this down. We are hitting all kinds of various different targets. We're hitting bridges and traffic infrastructure. So it really sucks for the Serb people because they're going to notice that like bridges are being taken out left, right, and all over the place. Same kind of operational method that was used in the war in Iraq. We kicked the Iraqi troops out of Kuwait, but we were also hitting targets all the way back to Baghdad during the Persian Gulf War. Okay? Now, sometimes it gets a little sticky. So, for example, here's a cruise missile being aimed for a target, and we're going to be like, well, let's hit some targets in Belgrade. Well, which targets? I don't know, like the military defense target or like intelligence targets or whatever. Just make sure you have a proper map that is updated. This is a building that was hit by a United States cruise missile, and it used to be a military building. This was hit on May 7th, 1989. Okay? I want to say it used to be like some kind of a military building, but it had switched, and so who was occupying it at that time? The Chinese Diplomatic Corps. It was not a laughing matter. The Chinese, let's say, they were very upset. They were upset at the United States of America. Chinese media were like, you know, they had the images of the people who were killed in the building because there were some people working there in the building when it was hit. We ended up paying, write this down, $28 million in compensation to the Chinese. This was in May of 1989. Did we want to go to war with China? No! Why did we hit that building? Oops. Yeah. I mean, and there was another one in Kosovo itself. There was a group of people moving along. It looked like a column of Serb military. It wasn't. It was Kosovar Albanian refugees, and they were hit, and 82 of them ended up dead. This is why it's so important that you get clear, accurate information if you're going to be targeting buildings or people with very explosive weaponry. In China, the Chinese Communist government was like, hey, let's have a little bit of protest activity. The Chinese people were very upset. Of course, they were hearing about it all in the news. And, some of them are thinking, oh my gosh, the Americans are terrible. They're like the Nazis. NATO is the Nazi. Look at little swastikas in the American flag. And they're doing that. It's like, how much expression is the Chinese government going to allow for? Well, they allowed these guys to go right up to the United States Embassy in Beijing. They didn't let them break in. That's like to Tehran in Iran. They didn't allow them to break in. But here's the Chinese police allowing them to, fire off rocks and all kinds of various different things. The United States Embassy at the time pretty much cleared everybody out because they didn't want to get hit by a stray rock or whatever. And it was pretty much under attack with Chinese government approval for, several days. And I was actually trying to organize my first trip at the time. I'm literally trying to recruit. I'm like saying to parents, can I take your kids to China next year? And they're looking at me like, because this is all in the news. I mean, this is going on the same time I'm having a recruitment meeting. And they're like, you must be nuts. And I'm like, it was an accident. We know it was an accident. They know it was an accident. We're going to do everything we possibly can to make it up to the Chinese. And they're ultimately going to accept our apology. Does the United States in 1999 and 2000 want to have a positive relationship with Communist China? And vice versa? By the time we went to China, it was all cool. The following summer, 2000, everything was cool. Got it? Yeah. Who was the main person in charge of the NATO effort? This man right here. United States General Wesley Clark. Okay? He is going to be given props. No U.S. lives were lost in this effort. Of course, you're thinking, how can U.S. lives be lost in this effort if all the planes are coming back, save two? And, I mean, we're hitting them with cruise missiles and so forth and so on. We don't have boots on the ground. Yeah. So he is going to do it. Okay? I mean, eventually we'll have ground troops, but that's after it's over. Okay? Although it's interesting. Put this down about Clark. He actually got on the bad side of his boss. Yeah, he pulled, a little bit of a MacArthur, General MacArthur. Remember MacArthur? His boss was President Truman, and MacArthur was in charge of the Korean War, and he was like, maybe we should kind of take out the North Koreans and the Communist Chinese, and maybe go nuke or something like that. What did Truman do ultimately to General MacArthur? They fired him. Clark is seeming to go to the public and advocate for the use of ground troops. He's seeming to sort of like direct that. As in, I mean, you can get this. It's like, how much military experience does General Clark have? Quite a bit. That's how you rise to the level of being a general. How much military experience did Bill Clinton have?
None.
What did he do during the Vietnam War? He did not serve in the United States military, nor did he inhale. And so, yeah. So it's going to be very interesting. Clark, and there'll be another situation where Clark is going to ultimately do something, and President Clinton's going to be like, I think we're just going to reassign you. Eventually, he ran for president in 2004. Hi. Yep. Mm-hmm. And he'll run in 2004 as a Democrat against George W. Bush. He's actually not even going to get the Democratic nomination. Okay? We'll talk about an incident that's going to be involved in afterwards. Meanwhile, of course, the Serbs are like, what the heck are we doing? As they're getting bombed, they institute what is known as Operation Horseshoe. They're looking at the situation going, okay, after all the fighting is done and so forth, we know that there's going to be folks coming in here, and they're going to redraw the lines, and they're going to draw the lines just like they did back in Bosnia, and they're going to look and see who's living where. So here's Operation Horseshoe. Okay. Here's the Serb response. They thought this was going to work, and they're not entirely without good reason to think it would. It's called Operation Horseshoe. Okay? They basically take the Serb military in kind of a horseshoe operation, horseshoe shape, and they apply pressure and they move in, basically trying to squeeze out the Kosovar Albanians. 800,000 will flee for their lives. 10 to 11,000 end up dead. The goal of theirs is to squeeze them out into where? Albania, yeah. Seek refuge in Albania. Get them out of the country. Because if we get them out of the country, then no problem. Oh, wow. Why are you still bombing us? There's no more Kosovar Albanians here that need to be protected. Do you understand that? 800,000 refugees. They're trying to get away from the Serb troops. Between 10,000 and 11,000. So, this is like an ethnic cleansing operation that is going on at the time. So like, just keep moving them, get them out, get them out, get them out, get them out. They refer to it as Operation Horseshoe. The Serbs deny it. But Amnesty International on the scene said there's clear evidence that Kosovars who were getting killed, it wasn't because of NATO bombing. It was because the Serb/Yugoslav army was pushing them out. There was rape, there was murder, there was forced expulsions. This is going on in the midst of all of these kinds of things. Do you understand that? Okay? But the bombing, of course, continues on. By May of 1999, the NATO bombing had destroyed all of the electric power grid for the city of Belgrade. And so, the power grid, yeah, it's going to be basically like, you guys want to continue doing that? We're going to take out your this, and your this, and then this, and we're going to put a lot more pressure on you. Who do you suppose ultimately is going to be sent in to talk to, who is the Serb leader at that time? Who is the man behind Operation Horseshoe? Who was the man behind the Serb control? Who is it? Milosevic. Milosevic is the leader. Who was the leader during the Bosnian War? Milosevic, the Serb leader. Who was the Serb leader during this conflict? Milosevic. Okay? It's very interesting because the Russians are going to be persuaded to go in and talk to Milosevic. Why would the Russians do this? To talk to Milosevic to get him to back down, to get him to pull his troops out of Kosovo, to get him to just like walk away from the whole thing. The Russians are in grave need of Western financial aid, and they will participate, playing a very particular role. The Russian representative is sent to talk to Milosevic and persuades Milosevic ultimately to agree to a ceasefire. June 10th, 1999, a ceasefire agreement. And the terms are quite clear. Serbs, NATO will no longer bomb you, and you have to get out of Kosovo. That's it. It's kind of like a surrender. You got that? Who won that fight? I suppose NATO on behalf of Kosovo. Operation Horseshoe did not ultimately work. The refugees, are they going to be able to come back? They will be able to come back. The Serb forces will no longer be there. Who is going to be in that region? It's going to be K4. What's K4?